Hi, I'm Michelle Tartaglio, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Jeff Graffeo, Clarkston Consulting's SAP and technology partner. Jeff, several of our clients have reached out to Clarkston to ask their need-to-know questions about the upcoming ECC maintenance deadline scheduled for 2027 and what they should be thinking about regarding upgrading to S4HANA. We'd love to get your perspective on these questions, so let's jump in. Why do so many companies see upgrading to S4 as purely technical rather than strategic? How can they shift this mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michelle. When you think about many of these companies have had SAP for many years, right? Even before they went on to ECC. So I've had clients that were, 20-year customers, went on to ECC, another 10 years. And when you look at it, when they went to ECC, that was supposed to be kind of the end state, for the platform. They would have a digital core, it would have enhancements come out, and now years later, technology's changed, and they're looking at what they could actually go to next. And as companies did these big projects years ago, they took a toll on those companies. Right? It was a heavy commitment from a resourcing standpoint, as well as just other assets within the company. And so when they look at doing another big projects, they've gone through one of those, they're hesitant. And so they, look at how their business model has changed, and that was kind of the impetus to move to ECC, to really get them into a platform that would allow them to grow. And they look at that platform as still being a stable one that is just going to the next release, and that's the S4HANA platform. So that's how companies think about it. The challenge with that is, as many companies did an ECC upgrade, they didn't necessarily do a minimum viable product. They did a tremendous amount of customizations, not modifications, but customizations to meet certain business requirements. That created a tremendous amount of technical debt over the past several years. And whereas they might have started with a low amount of customizations, they've had these platforms for 10 years, and now they have an insane amount of customizations that fit their business need at the time, but have made it challenging to actually move to an S4 platform that is going to be standard in any way. And so it'll kind of be in the same boat. And so as they look at it, they want to move to as an easy, platform as possible, an easy path to it, not have it, a huge project ahead of them. And they just kind of view this as a, course of doing business. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of companies, the way they're approaching this is like it's just an upgrade. Right? Their business model hasn't necessarily drastically changed. The platform, for the most part, meets their needs, and S4 is being thrown upon them because of the cliff on the support for ECC.
Yeah. To your point, most of our clients have been on ECC for over a decade. What is the strategic advantage of upgrading to S4HANA now, especially if their business has changed a lot through acquisition or change in business processes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the crux of the issue, is that most of these companies, their business has changed, right? They might have gone into this 10 years ago with a growth mindset. The platform has met the needs, but what it has also done is hampered their growth at this point. So you're kind of at, the usual life of an ERP system is 10 years. You're kind of at that point, and you should evaluate what your business model is and how it's changed. I can guarantee most of those companies, their business model has changed. And so as a result, you need to look at kind of, are the processes that you have in place really efficient? Are they as they were designed 10 years ago? Most likely they're not, and they're probably not being used the way that you think they're being used. And so, as you go through this is an opportunity to really look at moving more to the standard process that S4 might have available that wasn't available 10 years ago. So that's kind of one thing companies should be considering. And then also kind of what's the strategic, growth platform for that company, right? Is it organic, inorganic? Does that change your business model? Is the platform you set up 10 years ago really set for what it needs to be for the next 10 years? And that's the way that companies really need to be looking at this, as opposed to carrying forward a system that was built 10 years ago. Your process and your business have changed.
Yeah, but what about the cases where companies are seeking minimal disruption, especially those who remember those ECC implementations as large, painful experiences? How do you guide them to identify and retain value while preparing for the upgrade, especially when it comes to customization?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because I don't think the projects that you're doing in an upgrade need to be quite the same that they were many years ago. Many years ago, companies were, really kind of evolving into the ERP space, and essentially probably did those heavy lift type projects. Now at this point, it really is get a better understanding of how the processes as they were designed are really working. As an example, certain areas in a business, they pretty much operate the same. Finance, procurement, they're not drastically different in any company. Those aren't the areas that are critical most likely to a business operation. They're needed, but just not critical. And where there's areas that differentiate a company might be in their, kind of order processing area or, in their supply chain area. Those are the ones that really should be looked at. And so when you're doing, let's say, moving to an upgrade to an S4 platform from ECC, that's this whole idea of what, you'll have this concept of a green field versus a brown field versus a blue field. And a green field is scrap everything for the most part, you're going to build a whole new system. Brown field is you're going to take it as is, upgrade, and move forward. And a blue field is where you're going to be strategic around the areas that might differentiate you as a business that you should probably be looking at in evaluating those processes. And that's kind of where we're recommending companies to be smart about how to do a project. Those are lighter lift projects so that you're not having to necessarily commit as many resources. I still think those are, there's a benefit to committing the best resources that, a company has to be able to do a project like this, as it'll, determine the quality of the output.
And what does the journey to S4HANA typically look like, particularly when you think about the differences, as you mentioned, between greenfield, brownfield, and the bluefield implementations? How do they each impact the company overall, or how do you help clients think through those different options?
Yeah, I think that a couple things, that it's not a one size fits all, right? It depends on the journey of that company. So as an example, you might have a company that has grown through acquisitions through the years, and the platform they have now will not support future growth. You can't necessarily, bring in businesses, and have it work in a seamless fashion the way that you really want to because of what your planned future growth is. And in those cases, when you look at it, because you got processes that are all different, you need to evaluate and most likely move towards probably a greenfield implementation where you can harmonize your processes, get into a platform that will support kind of that future growth. Now, many companies have done that in years past, and the actual processes that they did put in place still are fairly straightforward and operational. They don't have a tremendous amount of customizations and technical depth within the application, and those are more geared towards those brownfield implementations. And then, from a bluefield perspective, again, it's probably the combination of the two, where you might have grown through, acquisition. You're at a point where there's some choices that you might have made in the past that you would make differently today. And as a result, you might want to implement certain modules that you didn't have available in the past. You might adjust your processes differently than the way they were done because they don't work for your business as they are today. But some of the other processes in certain areas, like finance, procurement as an example, might be okay. And then that's where you're probably more geared towards bluefield. So you're targeted, you're smart about what areas you want to invest in for a project like this. And whereas others, you're going to make a minimal investment because you want to more do, kind of an upgrade in those areas. And that's kind of how we look at this, is you're evaluating what's the strategic value of the different areas and the processes within the business. And something we'll probably get into at some point is, the different tools that would, are able to help with probably determining what do you actually have. And I think that's where some companies probably don't even realize how they're using the system, the processes that they've designed, might not necessarily be operating the way that they think they are.
Yeah, that's a good segue to what value do tools like Signavio and Celonis bring to an S4 upgrade project? What should companies know about leveraging them effectively?
Yeah, the doing data mining is a very analytical way to evaluate how the actual processes are operating within a company. I think companies, when you go in and you start to do a roadmap, you'll start talking about the processes. And traditionally, it's been sitting in a room with a bunch of people that will say, well, this is how we do it. And they map out the processes and you do a process flow. And then those are still very effective. The reality of that, though, is in practice, it probably doesn't operate that way. And that's where a tool like Signavio or Celonis helps you in a very empirical way determine how the processes are being done in the system. And so whereas when someone lays out a process, it might be what you call the happy path process, right? How it actually is supposed to be. And then when you leverage a process mining tool, you'll determine that, well, you actually do that process about 20% of the time, and the other 80% deviate from that process. And here's how it is, and here's, and so you now can determine, and again, in a very empirical way, what you actually are doing in the system. So that will help you, say, well, we need to look at this process. One, it could be just process changes and it's training for people that need to do things differently, or no, the system, the way it's set up is causing you to have to do this in a very different way. And that's what, it allows you to, as you design the new system, determine what are the areas that we should be focusing on to either do process adjustments or system configuration adjustments so that you can actually do things a little bit more to standard and kind of more of an industry standard practice.
Thank you. So Jeff, is there a way to use tools like Signavio for initial process assessments without an extensive investment, especially for clients unsure of long-term needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, again, when you use a tool, a process mining tool, you are selective on what area you might do it in. So you might do, process mining in a supply chain area or in like order to cash as an example, or even in just, procurement. So you don't necessarily have to do it for all processes. And so that's where these proof of concepts really come into play for companies. Usually, one is valuable to do, again, a process mining tool to understand how the processes are being used in practice. So it's less about what people think it's doing, it's more about, with empirical data, how the actual process is running through the system. And so doing a proof of concept, and usually these last anywhere from 2 months to 4 months, depending on the process area, to really understand kind of what's being done and how the system is being used. That helps inform areas that you want to investigate during, let's say, something like an upgrade, or even just being able to put something like this in place for ongoing operations so you can understand compliance to a process that's been laid out. So again, they're good for upgrades to inform you on how the system is being used and determine areas you need to invest in for doing more process analysis, as well as for ongoing maintenance within a company.
Thank you. Given that data migration is also a common area of concern, what selective data migration strategies do you recommend to ensure only relevant data moves over?
Yeah, so this is a great question. Most of the companies that we work with, I will say, have built up their system and have large databases where they've never archived data. So that's just kind of an unfortunate practice of what has happened over the years. That's caused problems for them because they've not been able to necessarily do upgrades, even minor upgrades, because it's challenging because of the size of the database, or they're behind on patches, whatever it is, right? I mean, it's kind of an indication of different things. And it's also probably not a good practice from a document retention policy. So most companies that we go into are kind of like that, where they don't have a documented archiving strategy nor a technical solution around it. So first and foremost, that's something that we will look at during an upgrade, because they're coming from a relational database where storage is fairly cheap to an in-memory database, and the very nature of doing that is expensive, just because of the amount of data that you're moving. So What you really need to do is put in a document retention policy, determine what legally you should have and what the company is comfortable with to retain as your starting point. So get the strategy, in place first, to then determine, should you embark on an archiving project or should you do a selective data transfer so that you're actually only moving the data that you need, because some companies as well will have, let's say, a bunch of legal entities and half of them are deprecated. Well, there's no point in bringing those companies over. You only need to bring the active companies over as an example. And so, again, you need to determine what's the profile of the company to say, should you do archiving, should you do selective data transfer? And there could be situations where companies want to also not just migrate selective data, but merge data in a way so that it's consistent going forward under a single legal entity, whereas in their prior system, it's under separate legal entities. And there's a rationale for wanting to do that. And again, that's a rationale for wanting to do a selective data transfer as well.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for taking some time today to help our clients and our audience think through the challenges and opportunities related to the pending deadline for SAP ECC maintenance and the path to S4HANA.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.